is our very first principle that we teach families about, and it's probably the bedrock of so much of the work that we do, and it's how our brains prioritize fear. So you want to explain that a little further? That's, again, these are so much of your go-tos, so you you explain them so well.
Well, the idea is and the principle is just that.
Mm-hmm.
The principle is all brains will prioritize fear over other activities in any given moment. The person who's sitting on the top of a roller coaster about to go down the hill is going to be a lot less functional if they try to do some higher mathematics skills, some algebra or trigonometry going down over that slope, because their brain's just not going to want to pay attention to what the cognitive part of their brain wants to do. If you're, if you believe in the evolution thing, the idea is also that, like, the brain that's walking pleasantly on a pleasant stroll through the jungle and is still scanning the environment for the snake is going to survive a lot better than the one who's strolling through the jungle and not paying attention for a snake.
I know you use the snake and that analogy and the roller coaster one a lot. And I remember not too long ago in the office, you had drawn a snake for a mom to see, and someone else had come in the room and they go, "Ooh!" It's like, put that thing away. It triggered them, just the picture of a snake. How these things engender fear in us. It's a survival response, and our
brains pay attention to it.
Yeah, we have to.
And the reason that this works out as our number one principle is that, it happens everywhere. Our children brains function this way. The adult brains in the family system function this way. That means if we as a parent, if we're very scared about something that's going to happen tomorrow, and we don't do anything intentionally with that fear, that's going to impact our ability to problem solve, to show love, to interact with our families the night before. And we need to be aware of it.
It's really hard to get this point across to parents, because they're thinking, well, I'm just not talking about it, so nobody's going to know.
Yeah. One of the statements we've heard from time to time is, well, I didn't tell them I was afraid of it.
Yeah.
It's like
they can't see it. I remember one wise client that said, "I think my kid's picking up my fear."
That's exactly what happens. And of course, when something scares a parent, it needs to scare a child too. Okay, they're hardwired to interpret things that scare parents are scary,
right?
By definition.
Right.
So it can our adult fear easily transfers to our children.
So with that in mind, that everyone is going to have fear. There's circumstances in life that's always going to create fear. What we find with our families then is, if they're not managing that fear, they're usually going in a couple of different directions when they become very angry.
Yeah, that's we've talked about it in previous videos. It's the second way that human brains learn to deal with fear. Is the first way, of course, is call it out, talk to a trusted adult. But when that doesn't work, the second thing our brains do is we turn it into anger. And that anger then is used to disrupt the adult world around us. So when we come into families that aren't recognizing this principle is going on in their home, a lot of times we see a lot of excess anger, a lot of yelling and screaming when people are not even aware that they're doing it all sometimes.
Yeah, these are just, again, like in the first video explains the principles and how they came about. It's how we can read families. We know if there's a lot of anger, then we know
there's a lot of fear.
Then the other piece that we've seen more recently is the addiction piece. How people are trying to avoid the fear in a variety of different ways.
Well, I think avoiding fear and turning fear into anger is it's endemic in today's world, because I think we tend to try to act like, well, we shouldn't have anything to be afraid of.
Yeah.
But life isn't like that. Of course, life is a fear fest, from beginning to end, and it's our job to learn to handle it. People who use drugs very often are trying to get away from feelings of fear that they have no other way to handle.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I honestly, there was a few clients here and there, especially more late in the last few years, who have told me that they got into using opioids because the doctor prescribed them for pain.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, well, I wasn't trying to avoid fear or blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, that is trying to avoid fear, because what happens is your body starts to crave the opioid to keep the pain down.
Yeah.
So when you don't get the drug,
Mm-hmm.
then you risk feeling pain, and anytime you're risking feeling pain, that's fear.
Yeah.
So oftentimes they'll start to use street drugs to try to keep that fear at bay.
Yeah, and it's not even about the pain at that time. It's about the fear of the pain coming.
Right.
So they're trying to stay ahead of it, and we've seen the downward spiral so often with the more and more drugs that are needed to take care of those fears.
And when parents kind of move into that space where they're not noticing their own fear,
Mm-hmm.
then their brains are always trying to deal with it. And usually, like you said, without intentionality, anger and avoidance are the two biggest techniques, and they don't work in the long run.
No.
You can do them for a short period of time, but eventually those two strategies overused will end up destroying relationships, leading to poor choices for finances, for eating, for basically anything that triggers your pleasure centers of your brain.
And so with that, we need to make sure that our audience understands it's not just about street drugs. Now we have the addiction to our electronics, our phones. How many times a person picks their phone up and checks it? And the numbers are overwhelming with that piece. Of course, we've got the video games, we've got the other TVs,
and the social media thing becomes a double-edged sword, because people will use it in order to try to not be afraid,
right?
Kind of escape
Right.
their present fear. But our brains were never designed to handle the input from thousands of people who are going to be commenting on this or that of our posts. Our brains aren't used to handling that, and so oftentimes that very technique, we're trying to avoid feelings of fear, and we wind up being more afraid afterwards.
Yeah.
Especially teenagers.
Yes. Yeah. Then of course there's the shopping addiction. There's the dopamine that's built up with the expectation of going shopping or gambling. Yeah. Of course we've got alcohol. There's so many things now on the addictions list.
It's almost as if our society is intentionally manufacturing fear avoidant tools.
Well, because if you watch the news, that's all you get.
Yeah.
Therefore.
No, that's not true.
All right.
You get 25 minutes of bad and 5 minutes of good at the end. That's how they keep you coming back.
Well, I don't think our brains are geared for that ratio.
No. We are being, the entire world these days is being sold a lot of fear. And our number one principle is the idea that we need to learn to intentionally handle that fear for ourselves. And of course, as we do it for ourselves, we become the models and the teachers for our children.
Yeah, because when you're in a state of fear, you don't function. You don't. You can't parent. And then what the children's takeaway message is my parent can't handle what's going on. I have to do it myself. And there's that also the piece of the children bring their fears to the parents.
They do that, don't they?
And if the parent can't handle that, there's a whole variety of things that's going to happen around that, and which leads into our second video on this first principle. And so I don't want to go there all the way, but it does affect the relationship with our children if we're not managing our fears, and their takeaway messages.
Leave you with some statements here.
Okay.
That kind of often highlight for us that there are some fear management problems going on within a family system.
All right.
Stuff like this. I can't enjoy myself right now. I'm afraid of what's going on at home.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I had someone say to me once, I'm afraid that my stove's getting dirty because I know the people at home are gonna keep my stove clean. I truly know that.
I don't ever want to go to that park again. Not after we lost little Jimmy for that time.
Yeah, they encode it as a bad experience, and they to avoid that bad experience, they just won't.
They'll avoid the entire fun of the
Right.
park for the family.
Right.
I like this one. I usually enjoy. This is not true of me personally, but I usually enjoy getting ready for class. Today, all I can think about is my speech. And these are evidences that this principal is functioning without restraint.
Mm-hmm.
You got something that they enjoyed, looking forward to class, and now it's being stripped away from them because all their brains can think about is because of the fear is that speech.
Yeah, which overrides the pleasure in life, just like the park example.
Yeah, and of course this one, I've heard you use this one right now. I can't focus on work right now. I'm too worried about fill in the blank.
Of course.
And I mean, this is the nature of a principle is that these things are going to function. Mm-hmm. They're going to be universal. Mm-hmm. These kind of things come out of my mouth. They come out of your mouth.
Yeah.
And what we want them to be is they want them to be flags to show us, my brain is defaulting to fear right now.
I'm wondering, and this is just a wondering, how many times a person says something like, well, I'll never have those people over to my house again, or I'm never going to do that again, or something, because there's a fear principle in that.
The whole downward spiral of family isolations that occurs when you bring a traumatized kid in. Mm-hmm. In some ways, that's fear avoidance, driven by fear avoidance.
Yeah.
You get critiqued for doing this, you get critiqued for doing that, and the next thing you know, you just, I don't want to have anybody over because I'm just going to be told I'm a bad parent.
Yeah, it's just going to make things worse.
Yeah.
How many times have we heard parents say, it's just going to make things worse if I do that?
The good news is there are ways to deal with fear other than turning it into anger and avoiding the subject altogether.
Yeah. Well, in the next video, we're going to have 8 red flags that's going to hopefully help our audience understand that they have a problem with this. Before we go to the fix, we are going to make it more harder for families. We have to pinpoint these things.
All right.
All right.
Well, I look forward to the next video.
Yes. Thank you all very much.